conversation is all about people, skills, and jobs. We're going to be discussing how to find the people with the skills you need for your business. What's the best way to manage your hiring efforts? And how to cultivate an environment where saying goodbye doesn't mean farewell forever. We're also going to hear why the business world needs more job shares at senior levels. My two guests, Helen Alkin and Jennifer Goldsmith, job share as Head of Early Careers and Recruitment Strategy Lead at the accountancy firm BDO. They first met many years earlier at Marks and Spencer. They moved within a year of each other to British Airways, and later on applied as a job share for the opportunity at BDO. And they're going to be sharing some of their job share experiences and insights with us. Welcome to the business of being brilliant, Helen and Jen.
Hello.
Hi, good to be here.
Lovely to have you both. And I'm guessing when you first met back in the day, you had little idea that you would end up becoming job share partners and working so closely together for many years.
I think it's absolutely been a work in progress. I think we had no idea at all, and it probably wasn't something back then that we were even considering. But absolutely, it's kind of organically grown over the years and makes perfect sense to us now.
Yeah. And do you feel like trailblazers, like in your roles and in your organisations, or do people say that you're a trailblazer? Helen, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'd necessarily classify ourselves as trailblazers. There's definitely some great job share partnerships out there in other organisations, but it's definitely something that I think people aren't as used to seeing, particularly now in the kind of post-pandemic world where flexible working kind of evolved and changed. So we definitely do get lots of comments, really positive comments actually, around the job share when people realise that we're a job share and start working with us as part of that.
That's really good that you're hearing kind of really positive comments back from people. And we're going to dive a little bit more very shortly into whether job sharing is on the rise or on the decrease, as well as talking a little bit about the role that you job share at doing at BDO. So really looking forward to chatting about all of that with you. And I guess coming back to your job sharing. So I mentioned in the intro that you had been a job share before, but you actually moved into this role as a job share pair or candidate, even though that role wasn't advertised for a job share. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened? Jen, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to your earlier comment, I think job shares where they are present are usually formed internally when kind of both applicants are known to a company. I think what's probably more rare is, as you say, branding yourself and going externally on the market. So we obviously formed our job share, or had the opportunity to do that at British Airways. And then the role came up, as you say, at BDO. It was advertised as one person, one FTE. But we found that we had the skills that would encompass the role. So we applied together, as you say. And I think that was probably a learning for us and for BDO. I think, they were very positive, very receptive. We were very lucky to have an audience with them fairly quickly after our application. And I think it was about us working through with them, actually, what does that look like from an interview perspective? How do you assess, both people independently, but then assess actually what skills they bring together to the table? But we had a very, very positive experience, and that's continued in role with them. So we feel very fortunate that they're very open-minded to the job share. They understand the benefits of that, and we've worked through with them actually how that can benefit the organisation and the role.
Yeah. And so did they have existing senior job shares before? Were they quite experienced with that, or was this quite a first for them?
No, it was really, really new for them. So particularly that sort of external hiring as a job share. And I think what kind of really helped from our perspective is we had the opportunity to come in and meet with the HR director informally initially, so that actually we were able to have an exploratory conversation around the role, around what both Jen and I were able to bring to the table, enable him to understand how our job share had kind of come into fruition before we went through the formal process. And I think that really, really helped to be able to ensure that kind of both parties were actually positive around the opportunities that the job share could bring to this role.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I was thinking that you were saying, Jen, that BDO were very open to exploring this, and I guess it's going to quite often be the case that the employer or the hiring organisation might be quite open to it, but not have had experienced it before. So actually, there's quite a big element of education that runs in parallel with the actual hiring process. So that example of what you just shared, Helen, actually sitting down and talking through, well, here's how it typically works for us, but also I guess you're educating them as well on here's the benefits to the business of having both of us in the role.
Yeah, and I think actually as a job share, one of the key fundamentals is not only do you know your strengths as part of that job share, but equally you know your partners, and you understand how the two dovetail together and kind of where that lends itself to opportunities. And I think it's that piece, as much as the kind of logistics of the role, that it's almost necessary for you to go in and provide comfort and education on.
Yeah, so you're kind of, obviously you're not just selling yourself, you're selling your job share partner as well. So it's really interesting to hear the dynamic of it. Yeah. And you mentioned about kind of the impact of the pandemic on obviously ways of working, hybrid working, flexibility. Are we seeing more job shares as a result? Or is that becoming less popular because organisations are prepared to offer more flexible working arrangements to people that's meeting their needs? Helen, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, sure. So I think you're absolutely right. I think interestingly, and I don't know whether they ever published it, but I had the opportunity to sit next to one of the CIPD analysts at a graduate recruitment network event early last year, who was absolutely fascinated when he found out that Jen and I were a formalised job share, because they'd been doing some analysis post-pandemic around flexible working and absolutely recognising that the pandemic definitely provided an opportunity for people to work differently than perhaps we had done prior to the pandemic. But one of the things that had come out of that study indicated that job shares were actually on the decline. And I think the stat he quoted at the time was that we only made up 0.3% of the workforce, and that over time that had gradually been diminishing. So I think absolutely, the pandemic has created more opportunity for people to work differently than they had done previously. But I think the value that a job share brings to both the individuals that are part of that job share and the organisation is something that we've really got an opportunity to share more widely and educate more organisations on.
Yeah, so there's that bit of kind of the missed value that you gain or the organisation gains from a job share partner that is on top of what they might have if those individuals had taken up a part-time or flexible arrangement separately. How would you describe that extra benefit then? What is it? What is the magic of being a job share in a senior roles, apart from obviously the enjoyment and the support you get from each other? But how do you sell that into a business? In case people are listening and thinking, this is something I've thought about. I know a potential job share partner, but I've got to sell it into the company. What would you suggest to them?
I think all too often it obviously comes about through, a desire to try and achieve work-life balance, to try and, retain skill base in the workplace that may not otherwise be able to stay. But I think there's more than that, as you say, Helen. I think actually it's better quality control, because you sense check and you divide and conquer between you. Playing to your strengths and your experience, and then you kind of come back and you offer each other a critical view on that workload, which is very difficult to do with yourself when you're a sole contributor in role. I think it reduces work-related stress and burnout in the workplace, because I think, again, you're sharing that load, you're sharing those frustrations, as well as sharing the achievements and the successes. So from that point of view, it's an absolute benefit. And then I think if it's done right it allows you to collaborate with your job share partner, but with also the workplace, to ensure that actually you're meeting end-to-end needs, which you may not be able to do in one role necessarily with one individual. So I think, in our case, between us, we do all areas of recruitment. So we have experience in experienced hire, in senior hire, in early careers. We bring that to our current role. And actually, again, potentially with one individual in role, they'll have specialised in one area for their career. So it brings a balance of kind of skills and workplace experience, which you may not otherwise achieve.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, yeah, go on, Helen.
No, I was just going to say, I think that element that Jen talked about, which is the ability for us to sometimes come at things from very different standpoints originally and debate and discuss those between ourselves. And ultimately, we often normally end up in exactly the same position, but you just don't have the ability to do that when you're working in role on your own. You come at it from the point at which you would come at it from, and you end at the point that you ultimately would get to. But that's a real value that certainly for me in the time that Jen and I have been job sharing, I think it's been a real development opportunity as well, because I think you really do challenge yourself and your way of thinking when you've got somebody else to bounce that around with.
Yes, and I've heard from other job share partners at senior levels, one I've had on the show, and then I had not the pair, but one individual talking about that experience of job sharing in a previous role. That's something they both emphasize as well, that it's that kind of constructive challenge and support from your job share partner. It's kind of like a peer mentoring, but also, you know each other so well, you can point out, well, you're going down that, favorite rabbit hole of yours, or you're, and you can take it from each other, because you know that you absolutely come from a place of trust and support and wanting to make, the best outcome for yourselves and the business. So I really hear your point about actually it results in a better quality debate and decisions, because you've had the time to, bat it around between the two of you. Yeah.
I think it can be a benefit for your stakeholders as well, and kind of peers within the business, because equally, we come at it, as Helen said, from very different characteristics, very different strengths. Helen's an extrovert, I'm an introvert, and we get to therefore tailor how we approach our stakeholders, actually, which style is going to be most suited to a particular meeting or a particular person, actually, who are they going to be most comfortable dealing with, etc. So, and equally with the team. So we get to divide and conquer based on our characteristics as well.
Yeah, that's really handy, isn't it? Because we all have our, like, as you say, our strengths and also our, blind spots, or the things that maybe don't work so well for us. So fantastic that you get to kind of figure out between you who's best placed to pick up a particular piece of work or a particular relationship, etc. It's been really interesting to hear about how you got into the role as a job share, and then how you demonstrate the value of being a job share. Let's get a little bit more into the work you do at BDO and all your expertise around hiring and recruitment. So you were just saying then, Jen, that you look after the full breadth of kind of recruitment at different levels of experience. Is that right?
We don't in this role, we have done in previous roles. So we bring with us the full breadth of that experience. In our current role, we look after the early careers piece for BDO, and we also look after kind of future-proofing our growth strategy and what that looks like from an overarching recruitment strategy to the firm.
Okay, so that's that very long-term, what capability do we need, and where are we getting that from? What are we growing in-house versus what do we need to supplement externally? That's a really interesting mix, isn't it? Very operational day to day, but some really strategic thinking as well. Yeah. And how do you balance your time across those things? Helen, how do you manage those two quite different bits of work, I guess?
So the operational piece is clearly in the early careers is in the early careers space, and that's where predominantly the largest amount of our time is focused. But I think probably it goes back to how Jen and I naturally started to work together individually in our previous roles when we started and first connected at Marks and Spencer, because I think that then plays through to how we very much operate as a job share and as a partnership in the role that we currently do. And that is about the fact that you can't just look at your early careers strategy in isolation around what are the needs of the business here and now. You absolutely need to connect the dots up. And certainly Jen and I, when we first started working together before we were a job share, I think that's when we realised the power and the opportunity that did, because Jen recognised that she was having conversations with senior stakeholders in the business and looking at what the market would yield in terms of an experienced hire to bring somebody directly into that role. And that naturally then starts the conversation around, okay, actually, where is the market struggling to yield this? Where do we need these future skills and development opportunities? And actually, therefore, let's get the early careers piece around the table as part of that discussion, so that we can absolutely start to identify what is it that we're needing to buy into the organisation, where have we got a need to develop, and where do we need to absolutely build on that and bring that early careers talent in for our future kind of growth and protection of where those future skills need to be.
Yes, I can really see how that works, and how it leads to kind of longer term conversations about your people hiring strategy and your skills that you need as a business. I mean, I keep reading over time lots of articles that talk about the skills gaps that employers are wrestling with in this country, and also things like how unprepared young people are for the world of work today. I know there was clearly the hiatus of the pandemic, which really affected people's kind of work and office readiness, etc. But what's your take on the landscape and the challenge for employers? Is it difficult to get the skills you need? Is it just specific skill areas that there's a real shortage in, or is it because actually everybody's just so much more picky and choosy, and we want it to look like this and we want to work like that, that it's becoming harder to find what you need in the package that you want?
I think look, we're in an incredibly competitive marketplace. We know that. I think there's probably a little bit of a disconnect between what students want to be doing in the workplace versus what the workplace currently needs. So perhaps where they're focusing their attention and their wants for skills, etc., doesn't quite add up to actually the needs of today. But I think there is also, and you alluded to it there, that post-pandemic piece. It's about the confidence they have to be workplace ready, and about us understanding actually what we need to do to bolster some of those softer skills and to give them the confidence to come into the workplace, particularly where they've been in, a predominantly virtual environment up until now. Some of that communication, that stakeholder readiness is not necessarily there. And we are, particularly relevant for us, but for all those organisations that rely on, new joiners taking a professional qualification, a lot of that focus can be spent on the technical and on the professional qualification. And I think it's about actually us challenging ourselves within the organisation to get a balance between what do they need to do study-wise to fulfil their professional qualification, but how are we going to make sure that they feel rounded off on the softer skills of things like stakeholder management, influence, communication, to feel ready to do the role when they qualify the other end. And I think sometimes achieving that balance is tricky.
So there's a bit of a shift going on from what I'm hearing you describe, that it's not just 100% focus on technical skills. It's much more rounded thinking about what's the broader skill set that people are going to need when they pop out of the other end of their kind of development program or career, early career track into, I guess, those first line manager roles and things like that.
Yeah. And then preempting what skills are going to be required, because I think we know that the world is moving on at such a pace currently with the likes of AI, etc. As an organisation, we need to be thinking, as do many others, around kind of what skills are going to be necessary by the time they've qualified. So is it going to be the same skills now that they're training in, or is that going to be something completely different? And therefore, where do we need to add and support that? And embrace some of the new technology that's coming in and understand actually how that can provide opportunity rather than paralyse us as a business.
Yes. So are you looking for and finding people with this emphasis on skills that might look and have done quite different things study-wise and I guess work experience-wise than is previously the case? Helen?
I think there's definitely a shift. I don't know necessarily that it's a whole scale move, but I definitely think that there has become more of an opportunity to really look at students from much, and particularly in our world students, but from much more kind of diverse backgrounds, think about the journey that somebody has been on academically and what else they've done outside of that academic journey. So, absolutely, we have the benefit in early careers of being able to really recruit based on an individual's potential rather than necessarily what they've got sitting on their CV. And I think that's a really privileged position to be in. I think where we've got the sort of disconnect and where we've got more work to do to help students is thinking about how we can best set them up to make that transition into their kind of first world of work opportunity. And we've seen some research recently, haven't we, Jen, through some of the stuff that we get here at BDO around actually a slight disconnect between where students perceive they are lacking skills versus where employers are perhaps saying they're looking for those skills. And there's some really interesting things that come out of that. So things like, for example, commercial acumen is one of the things that students perceive they don't necessarily have, but organisations would say is really, really important to them. And there are others that I think we've got an opportunity to think about how we can help students really think about the opportunities that they've got outside of just their academic world to develop some of those broader skills.
Yes. So do you also, in your role, help with that transition into those first roles at BDO, or is it another team that then takes over from kind of the moment they land and helps develop that and helps them assess where their strengths and weaknesses and kind of development priorities are?
I think it's something that we absolutely do as part of that kind of journey to attract somebody to even consider applying for us. So there's a lot of work that we're doing in the outreach space at schools, at colleges and at universities to start thinking about how we can engage and support young people much, much earlier than at the point at which they're thinking about making their application to us, and thinking about how do we help equip and develop them to have some of those skills, and equally recognise things that they might have done that are giving them skills that they maybe haven't made that connection on. So as part of our team, we've got a much bigger focus now on looking at getting in front of students much, much earlier than we ever used to, and thinking about how we equip them with a broader range of skills beyond just the come and work for us, and this is an exciting sector to be part of.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear how you're kind of educating them about where they might have gained experiences that they can draw on, and that helps give them confidence when they step into their first role. And are you hearing students say things in interview stage or ask questions like, am I allowed to work from anywhere? Those kind of, can I go and work from, the Maldives for a month in the winter and stuff like that? A kind of on their wish list. Is that really? What's the most interesting things you see popping up?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the world has become a smaller place. So we have a lot more international applicants. Therefore, there are questions around, could I perhaps kind of go home? Could I visit my family and work from there? So we are, as a firm, we've looked at a kind of working abroad policy, and if that's something we can accommodate in part in a small way each year. But I think absolutely that the post-pandemic world did set up a kind of a need for us to look more flexibly at requests and to understand that there is more desire for that, but equally to challenge back where we think it's going to be really positive and beneficial to the candidate or to the employee, to be around their peers, to be physically in an office where they can learn. Because I think there's a balance, isn't there? We all love the flexibility, and that works very well. But equally, we don't want to miss that natural absorption of learning that you have from being surrounded by peers in the office on a daily basis. And I think that's probably the balance that a lot of organisations are now struggling to kind of form and find a middle ground on, is actually how do we sell them the benefits of being in the office, as opposed to how do we necessarily meet all the requests to work flexibly.
Yes, and I know particularly for the younger cohort in a workplace, the big value that comes from being in person is that opportunity to learn by watching a senior colleague, and the informal kind of learning moments when you're going in and out of meetings together. I mean, that was a huge part of my own development, was just sitting and watching a senior consultant lead a meeting, deal with a client objection, handle a tricky question, and then I got to say, oh, why did you say that? Or why were they asking this? So much of the learning happens like that in those kind of outside the formal meetings in a way, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and more organic conversations that come up where you have those kind of really useful discussions with colleagues. I think Teams and Zoom, etc., it was really, really useful and great tools for us, but it tends to be very intentional. So you call someone or you schedule a meeting to talk about a specific subject or issue, as opposed to just that natural organic conversation that happens in the office. And I think that we all learn from that and benefit.
Yeah, definitely. And I know obviously you focus on the start of people's work journey and time at BDO, because you're at the hiring end of things. But I guess you also see people who have worked at BDO in the past. And I'm also thinking, younger people today don't seem to have, obviously the same expectation as perhaps our parents' generation did, is that if I'm going into this role, I may be here for the next 4 decades. They might, at a stretch, be there for the next 4 years before they decide something else is calling their attention. So I'm interested to explore, how you say goodbye, but make it clear that it might not be goodbye forever. How do you let people know that you're open, I guess, unless there's been a real performance issue or something, to welcoming people back, perhaps in a different capacity later on? Do you get involved in those conversations with people?
I think as part of the sort of recruitment journey, that those relationships are formed quite early on, and certainly, to your point, we recognise that the majority of individuals joining our organisations now probably don't anticipate staying with us for life. And I think the sort of statistics from a graduate perspective show that most graduates perceive that they'll stay with their first employer for under 3 years. So it's absolutely part of the conversations that we have internally, and part of our strategy is recognising that we're likely to see some of those individuals move on to other organisations. But actually, the value of that is tenfold, because that's about people going and developing broader skills, broader understanding of different organisations, growing themselves, and actually the value that they can then bring to our organisation, should they boomerang back into our organisation, is really, really significant. So I think we, whether it be on a formal basis or an informal basis, organisations like ours now are absolutely putting much more emphasis into thinking about how we see people leave the organisation, and how we use tools available to us to keep those conversations going and keep those relationships going.
Yeah, that's something I very much wrote about when I was writing my book, about thinking about the time that an employee is with you in a much more longer term perspective, to include the time before they formally join you, and that's all your outreach work that you were talking about, and kind of education work, but the time after, when they move on and then potentially come back in a different guise, maybe as a client or a strategic advisor or something like that. So really interesting to hear your perspective on that, as people who are actively bringing people in and then perhaps bringing people back in again later on. And I guess a final question to ask is, if you were to reflect back on your own selves at the start of your working life, and think about all that you've experienced and about the world of work and what's changed, is there what would be a piece of advice you'd tell your younger self now? I'm quite interested to hear that from your perspective of your professional roles as well.
For me, I think it would be about taking opportunities and seizing opportunities when they present themselves. I think we place a lot of emphasis still on seeing somebody's career grow in a kind of linear fashion. And actually, I think for me, I've always had the opportunity and have really valued working for organisations where there's been an opportunity to go to do breadth in roles as well, and to perhaps take opportunities that might not immediately feel like it's that promotion that you were waiting for, but actually it gives you the ability to really develop yourself and have a greater understanding of how that then plays out into the wider context of an organisation. So my advice to my younger self would be absolutely take every opportunity that presents itself.
Yeah, that's great. Really resonates with me. Thank you. Jen, what would you tell your younger self, fresh out of uni or college or whatever?
I absolutely concur with Helen. I think absolutely kind of reframe opportunities differently. But I think also be really open-minded about where those opportunities might lay, and take into account and go out and be inquisitive about the experience around you. I think have those conversations. We all too often, especially in a corporate world, end up working in silos. And I think actually had Helen and I done that, we probably wouldn't be where we are now. And I think whilst you may not think somebody else's viewpoint is relevant, or that their experience might lend itself to advice, actually test it out and see, ask the question. Because I think sometimes just that sharing of knowledge, sharing a viewpoint, leads you to perhaps a more informed answer.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And even just taking the time to ask those things, or if people you've come across and don't know well, all the time you're building your professional network, right? You never know how your paths might cross again in the future, and how useful you might be to one another. So yeah, fantastic. I love hearing that advice. Thank you. And thank you so much as well for coming on the podcast. If people want to connect with you professionally, or find out more about what BDO does, or chat to you about early careers and hiring strategies, etc., what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn. I think we're both fairly active on LinkedIn and absolutely welcome some of those conversations. So yeah.
Great. There you go, listeners. I will pop a link to both your LinkedIn profiles in the show notes, and there's a very generous invitation to get in touch if you're interested about chatting about anything we've covered in the podcast today with Jen and Helen. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show, talking to us about your job sharing experiences and how you sell the value and prove the value of that to the employer, but also how the kind of skills landscape in the world of work is evolving, and how we can help set particularly early careers candidates up to land well, and then hopefully make great progress in their first role in their organisation before they decide it's time to go build those different experiences. Thank you so much for being brilliant guests.
Thanks, Helen.
Thanks for having us.